The person you are waiting for is not coming back, and the version of you who believes otherwise is the same version who has been quietly punishing yourself for months. Sit with that sentence before you scroll past it. Something inside you already knows this, and something else inside you has been working very hard to make sure you never fully admit it. This is not a video about an avoidant partner. This is a video about the psychological architecture you built the moment you decided that waiting was a form of love instead of what it actually is, which is a form of self-abandonment disguised as patience. There is a reason waiting feels noble. There is a reason silence feels like proof of depth. And there is a reason the human mind will choose the agony of uncertainty over the relief of truth every single time, unless it is taught otherwise. What you are about to hear will not comfort you. It will not tell you that if you wait long enough, they will finally see your worth. It will do something far more dangerous. It will show you what waiting has actually been doing to your nervous system, your identity, and your capacity to ever trust yourself again. And by the end, you will understand why the person who needs to change is not them. Waiting is not passive. This is the first illusion that must be destroyed before anything else can be understood. The mind treats waiting as stillness, as a kind of noble suspension where nothing is happening and no harm is being done, but underneath that stillness a quiet erosion is taking place. Every day spent waiting for someone to return is a day spent rehearsing your own unworthiness, even if you never say those words out loud. The brain does not distinguish between hope and self-punishment when both produce the same chemical loop of anticipation and disappointment. You are not simply hoping, you are training your own nervous system to associate longing with love, and this training does not stop once the waiting ends. It follows you into every future relationship, every friendship, every quiet moment where you must decide whether you are worth pursuing or worth ignoring. Consider a man who spends years restoring an old house that was never structurally sound to begin with. He does not see the cracked foundation because he has already decided the house is worth saving, and once a person decides something is worth saving, the mind begins filtering out every piece of evidence that suggests otherwise. This is not stupidity. This is a documented feature of human cognition called effort justification, and it explains why the longer someone waits for an avoidant partner to change, the more convinced they become that change is coming, regardless of what the actual behavior shows. The suffering itself becomes proof of love. The waiting becomes the evidence. And this is precisely where the trap closes, because now leaving does not feel like freedom. It feels like abandoning something you have already poured yourself into. Few people understand that avoidant attachment is not a personality trait. It is a nervous system adaptation built in childhood, designed to protect a person from a very specific kind of pain, the pain of needing someone who was unreliable, intrusive, or emotionally unsafe. An avoidant person did not wake up one day and decide that closeness was dangerous. Somewhere, early, closeness was paired with loss of control, and the body remembers what the mind has long forgotten. This does not excuse the behavior, it explains the architecture behind it, and once you understand the architecture, you stop taking the distance personally, because you realize the distance was never about your value. It was a survival strategy installed long before you ever entered the room. Here is a truth that almost nobody says clearly. The person waiting is often not waiting for the avoidant partner. They are waiting for an old wound to finally close. If you were taught early in life that love must be earned through patience, through proving yourself, through enduring silence without complaint, then an avoidant partner becomes the perfect stage for an old psychological play to repeat itself. You are not simply in love with this person. You are reenacting a pattern your nervous system has been rehearsing since childhood, searching for the moment when someone finally stays instead of leaves. This is why letting go feels unbearable. It is not just the loss of one relationship. It feels like the loss of a chance to finally rewrite the ending of a much older story. Empaths carry their own blind spot, and it is rarely discussed with honesty. The empath does not simply love deeply. The empath often equates suffering with intimacy, believing that the depth of their pain is proof of the depth of their love. This creates a dangerous inversion, where the relationship that hurts the most begins to feel like the relationship that matters the most. Meanwhile, healthy connection, the kind built on consistency and mutual presence, can feel oddly flat, almost boring, because the nervous system has been calibrated to associate love with intensity rather than peace. This is not weakness, it is a miscalibration, and miscalibrations can be corrected, but only once they are named. Notice what happens the moment someone finally stops waiting. A strange grief appears, one that has nothing to do with missing the person and everything to do with losing access to the fantasy. The fantasy was never about who the avoidant partner actually was. It was about who they represented, the possibility of finally being chosen by someone who struggled to choose anyone. Losing that possibility feels like losing a future that was never guaranteed to begin with. And grieving an imagined future is often harder than grieving a real relationship, because there is no concrete memory to process, only an absence shaped like everything you hoped would happen. Responsibility enters the conversation here, and it must enter without cruelty. You are not responsible for the avoidant partner's fear of closeness. You are responsible for how long you allowed uncertainty to define your worth. These are two completely different forms of ownership, and confusing them is what keeps people stuck. Taking responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for their inability to show up. It means recognizing that you had agency the entire time, even when it did not feel that way, even when every part of you insisted that leaving was impossible. Agency does not disappear during heartbreak. It simply becomes harder to access, buried beneath adrenaline, attachment chemicals, and fear disguised as hope. A harsh truth now, one that most people avoid saying directly. If someone has shown you through repeated behavior that they cannot offer consistency, waiting longer will not produce a different outcome. It will only produce a longer version of the same outcome. Human beings do not transform simply because someone else waited long enough. Transformation requires internal motivation, self-awareness, and often external consequences that force change. Your patience is not a consequence. Your patience is often the very thing removing the pressure that might have otherwise forced growth. This does not mean patience is worthless in general. It means patience without boundaries becomes indistinguishable from self-neglect. There is a deeper layer beneath all of this, one that reframes the entire situation. The real war was never between you and the avoidant partner. The real war has always been between the version of you that wants to be chosen and the version of you that already knows your worth does not depend on being chosen at all. Every day spent waiting is a day spent letting the first version win. And the moment you begin building a life so aligned with your own values that external validation becomes unnecessary, the entire dynamic loses its power over you, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped needing someone else's presence to feel complete. Silence is often misread as a message, when in truth it is simply an absence, and the human mind cannot tolerate absence without filling it with meaning. When an avoidant partner withdraws, the space they leave behind does not stay empty for long. The mind rushes in with interpretations, stories, and explanations, most of which say more about the person doing the interpreting than about the person who left. You begin narrating their internal world without any real evidence, deciding that their silence means they are struggling, that their distance means they are secretly missing you, that their coldness is a mask for something deeper. This is not intuition. This is projection, and projection feels like insight because it is generated by the same mind that desperately needs the silence to mean something other than what it actually means. Philosophers have long understood something that modern relationship culture has forgotten, which is that certainty is often less important than the ability to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. The person who waits obsessively for clarity from someone incapable of giving it is not failing because they lack patience. They are failing because they have never built the internal capacity to sit with not knowing. This capacity, often called ambiguity tolerance, is one of the most underdeveloped skills in modern emotional life, and its absence is precisely why so many people would rather stay in painful clarity than face healthy uncertainty. Waiting becomes a way of avoiding the harder task of learning to exist without answers. An unexpected truth now, one rarely spoken aloud in relationship psychology. Sometimes the person who waits is not actually waiting for the avoidant partner to return. They are waiting for permission to finally let go, and they are hoping the other person will provide that permission by doing something cruel enough, distant enough, or final enough that leaving no longer feels like a choice. This is a quiet form of self-protection. If the ending is forced upon you, you do not have to carry the weight of having chosen it. But this strategy has a hidden cost, because it transfers your power to someone who has already demonstrated they cannot be trusted with it. Waiting for someone else to end things for you is still a form of waiting, and it still keeps you frozen in a story that is no longer yours to write. Consider the psychological difference between longing and loyalty, because these two states are often confused. Longing is directed toward absence. It thrives on distance, on what has not yet happened, on the imagined version of a person rather than the actual one standing in front of you. Loyalty, by contrast, is directed toward presence. It requires someone who shows up consistently enough to be loyal to in the first place. When you find yourself more devoted to someone's absence than you ever were to their presence, this is not love reaching its purest form. This is longing wearing the costume of loyalty, and the two are not the same, no matter how similar they feel from the inside. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone who is emotionally unavailable, and it does not resemble ordinary tiredness. It resembles the exhaustion of constantly translating a language the other person refuses to speak clearly. You become fluent in interpreting half-sentences, mixed signals, and inconsistent affection, developing an entire emotional vocabulary built around decoding someone else's fear. This skill feels like intimacy because it requires so much attention and effort, but it is not intimacy. It is surveillance disguised as closeness, and the mind confuses the two because both require intense focus on another person's inner state. Now consider what an avoidant partner experiences internally, something rarely explained with any nuance. Many avoidants do not withdraw because they feel nothing. They withdraw because they feel too much, too quickly, and their nervous system interprets emotional intensity as danger rather than connection. What looks like indifference from the outside is often a desperate internal negotiation between wanting closeness and fearing what closeness has cost them in the past. This does not make their behavior acceptable in a relationship that requires mutual presence, but it does dismantle the myth that avoidants simply do not care. Caring and capacity are not the same thing, and confusing the two is what keeps empathetic partners hoping that enough love will eventually override a nervous system pattern that has nothing to do with how much love is being offered. A dangerous belief must be confronted directly. Many people secretly believe that if they can simply love someone correctly enough, patiently enough, unconditionally enough, that love alone will be sufficient to change another person's capacity for connection. This belief feels romantic, but it is psychologically catastrophic because it places the responsibility for someone else's healing onto your own devotion. Healing is not transferable. You cannot donate your emotional stability to someone else's nervous system the way you might donate blood. They must build that capacity themselves through their own awareness, their own discomfort, and often through consequences that only appear once you stop softening the impact of their avoidance. Something deeper begins to surface once this is understood, something that reframes the entire waiting period. The waiting was never really about them at all. It was a mirror, reflecting back every unresolved belief you hold about your own worth, your own patience, and your own tolerance for being treated as optional. If you believe deep down that love must be difficult to be real, an avoidant partner will always feel more compelling than someone who offers you ease. If you believe you must prove your value before receiving affection, distance will always feel more familiar than consistency. The relationship did not create these beliefs. It simply activated beliefs that were already sitting quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal themselves. Here is where most people stop short, settling for the comfortable conclusion that they simply need better boundaries or more self-respect, as though these are switches that can be flipped through willpower alone. But boundaries without identity work collapse under pressure because a boundary is only as strong as the self-worth behind it. You can recite the words "I deserve better" 1,000 times, but if the nervous system underneath those words has never experienced what better consistently feels like, the words remain hollow, a script performed rather than a truth embodied. Real change does not begin with the boundary. It begins with the slow, uncomfortable work of becoming someone whose nervous system no longer mistakes chaos for chemistry, and this transformation cannot be rushed, no matter how urgently you want the pain to end. Every relationship carries an invisible ledger, one that most people never consciously examine, where each person quietly tracks what they have given against what they have received. The problem is not that this ledger exists. The problem is that many people waiting for an avoidant partner have stopped keeping it honestly. They round up small gestures into large ones, they interpret rare moments of presence as proof of deep devotion, and they quietly erase the long stretches of absence because acknowledging them would mean facing an imbalance too painful to sit with. This is not deception directed at the other person. It is a private deception, one you perform on yourself, and it survives only because no one is checking your math. A question rarely asked in relationship psychology deserves attention now. What does it actually cost the body to wait? Not metaphorically, but physiologically. Chronic uncertainty activates the same stress response as physical threat, flooding the system with cortisol, disrupting sleep, appetite, and even immune function. This is why waiting for someone who cannot commit does not simply feel emotionally draining. It is measurably biologically draining, and the body does not distinguish between waiting for a text and waiting to be attacked. Both register as unresolved threat. Understanding this transforms the waiting period from a romantic ordeal into what it actually is, a prolonged stress event that the body is desperately trying to resolve, even while the mind insists on staying inside it. Think of a musician who spends years tuning an instrument that was built with a structural flaw, one that no amount of tuning can correct. Each adjustment produces a brief improvement, just enough sound of harmony to justify continuing, but the underlying flaw guarantees the instrument will always drift back out of tune. This is what many people experience with an avoidant partner who occasionally offers moments of closeness. Those moments are real, but they are not evidence of resolution. They are brief corrections on an instrument that has not been fundamentally repaired, and mistaking temporary harmony for lasting change is one of the most common ways people extend their own suffering far longer than necessary. There is a particular kind of pride hidden inside prolonged waiting that almost no one admits to feeling. Somewhere beneath the sadness, there is a quiet belief that your capacity to endure this much pain proves something about your character, your loyalty, your depth as a person. Suffering becomes a badge, evidence that you loved harder than anyone else could have. This pride is dangerous precisely because it feels virtuous. It disguises self-destruction as devotion, allowing you to remain in a depleting situation while believing you are demonstrating strength rather than avoiding the much harder task of walking away. Consider what it truly means to respect yourself, because the word has been softened into something almost meaningless by overuse. Self-respect is not a feeling. It is a series of decisions made consistently over time, often when no one is watching and no one will ever know whether you honored them or not. Self-respect is deciding privately that you will not continue investing emotional energy into a pattern that has already shown its ceiling. It requires no audience, no apology, and no explanation. The moment you begin needing someone else to validate your decision to stop waiting, you have already handed your self-respect back to the very person who never protected it in the first place. An overlooked psychological reality deserves examination here, one that reframes avoidant behavior without excusing it. Many avoidant individuals experience a strange phenomenon where distance increases desire and closeness decreases it, almost like an emotional thermostat working in reverse. This is not manipulation in most cases, it is a conditioned response, often rooted in early experiences where love was either engulfing or withdrawn without warning, teaching the nervous system that safety exists only in the space between connection and disconnection, never fully in either. Recognizing this pattern does not mean you should try to manage it. It means understanding that no amount of your own consistency can override a thermostat that was calibrated long before you arrived, and expecting yourself to fix it is expecting yourself to succeed at a task that was never actually yours to complete. A paradox now, one that unsettles most people the first time they truly absorb it. The partner who withdraws is often terrified of abandonment, not intimacy itself. Their withdrawal is frequently a preemptive strike, an unconscious attempt to leave before they can be left, because somewhere in their history, being left caused a pain so significant that controlling the timing of loss became more important than risking real connection. This means the very behavior that feels like rejection to you may actually be their attempt to protect themselves from a fear you are not even aware you triggered. Understanding this does not obligate you to stay and manage their fear. It simply removes the false narrative that their distance is a verdict on your worth. Empaths often develop a dangerous skill without realizing its cost, the skill of shrinking their own needs to match the emotional bandwidth of whoever they are with. This adaptability feels like generosity, even like maturity, but it slowly erodes the empath's ability to recognize when their needs are being met at all. Over time, a smaller and smaller amount of connection begins to feel sufficient, not because the empath requires less, but because their internal calibration for enough has been quietly redefined downward, meal by meal, silence by silence, until what once would have felt like starvation now feels like a completely acceptable diet. Notice how time itself becomes distorted during prolonged waiting. A single warm interaction after weeks of distance can feel more significant than months of steady affection from someone reliable, simply because the brain assigns disproportionate meaning to reward that arrives unpredictably. This is not weakness of character. This is the same neurological mechanism that makes variable reinforcement more addictive than consistent reinforcement. The exact principle that governs behavior in games of chance. You are not simply hoping for love. In many cases, you are caught inside a reward system engineered, often unintentionally, to keep you hooked precisely because it never delivers consistently enough to satisfy you or scarcely enough to make you walk away. A harder truth follows closely behind this one. If your nervous system has been shaped to find unpredictable affection more compelling than steady affection, healthy love may initially feel unfamiliar, even slightly uncomfortable when it finally arrives. This does not mean healthy love is wrong for you. It means your baseline has been distorted, and distorted baselines require conscious recalibration rather than blind trust in what feels most exciting in the moment. Many people abandon genuinely stable relationships because stability feels foreign, mistaking the absence of anxiety for the absence of chemistry, when in truth it may be the first sign that their nervous system is finally being offered something it was never given the chance to practice recognizing as safe. The deepest layer of this entire subject finally reveals itself here, and it has nothing to do with the avoidant partner at all. Waiting was never truly about proving your love to someone else. It was an attempt to prove something to yourself, that you are capable of loving fully, deeply, and without reservation, even when it is not returned. This impulse is not shameful. It reveals a profound capacity for devotion. But that same devotion, once redirected toward your own growth, your own healing, and your own life, becomes something far more powerful than anything it could have ever built while waiting for someone unwilling or unable to meet it. The love was real. It was simply aimed at the wrong target for far too long, and recognizing this is not the end of your capacity to love. It is the beginning of learning where that capacity actually belongs. The waiting ends today, not because the pain has fully disappeared, but because you have finally understood what the waiting was actually protecting you from facing. Every hour spent hoping for someone incapable of consistency was an hour stolen from the one person who has been waiting far longer for your full attention, and that person is you. Close this video and do one thing immediately. Write down, in plain words, what you have been tolerating in the name of love, and read it back to yourself as though a friend had written it. You would never allow someone you love to endure this. Stop allowing it for yourself. The nervous system that learned to survive on uncertainty can also learn to thrive on peace, but only once you stop offering it anything less. You were never meant to spend your life proving your worth to someone unwilling to see it. You were meant to become someone so rooted in your own value that waiting quietly becomes unnecessary. Let that be the truth you carry forward long after this moment fades.